Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to pull back the curtain on one of Canada's most misunderstood and honestly most controversial federal programs. It's this policy that's supposed to be the glue holding the entire country together, but a lot of people are now saying it's the very thing that's tearing it apart.
It all kicks off with a simple enough question, right? Like this one from a viewer. Equalization. I mean, it sounds so technical, almost boring, like something you'd find buried in a government spreadsheet. Well, be careful what you ask for, because the answer to that simple question isn't some polite history lesson. No, it's more like an autopsy of a broken financial marriage. When you start peeling back the layers of that one word, you find the hidden wiring of Canada and the source of so much of the anger that's boiling over in the Federation today. So, to really understand the conflict, first we have to get the official story straight. What exactly is this program that costs Canadian taxpayers over $25 billion every single year? On paper, the goal is actually pretty noble. The whole idea, which got baked right into the Constitution back in '82, is to make sure that, say, a kid in New Brunswick has access to roughly the same quality of healthcare and education as a kid in Alberta. It's about creating a national baseline for public services, no matter where you happen to live. But to see the cracks in the system, you've got to follow the money. And this is where we find the first huge disconnect between the official story and the economic reality on the ground. This right here is a classic case of something being technically true, but economically, well, false. Yes, the check is technically signed by the federal government in Ottawa, but, where does Ottawa get its money? It gets it from taxpayers. And because provinces like Alberta have historically had higher incomes and more profitable companies, they just end up paying a much, much bigger slice of those federal taxes. And the scale of this it's just mind-boggling. Between 1961 and 2020, it's estimated that Alberta alone made a net contribution of $600 billion to the rest of Canada. That is money that left the province in federal taxes and simply never came back in federal spending or services. So where does all that money go? Well, overwhelmingly, it's gone to one province. Quebec has received roughly half of all equalization payments ever made. Now, this isn't some conspiracy, it's just how the formula works. Because of its large population and historically lower economic output per person, the math always flags it as needing support. But as you can imagine, this persistent imbalance is the source of enormous political friction. And this leads us to the second hidden mechanism, and this one is deeply counterintuitive. The formula itself can actually punish provinces for trying to get richer. It creates what some economists have called a welfare trap, but for entire provinces. I mean, that sounds like a total paradox, doesn't it? How could developing a new mine or a new energy project actually leave your provincial government with less money than you had before you started? Well, it's built right into the system's math. Here's how it works. A province that gets equalization, a have-not province, decides to develop a new resource. That project makes new tax money for the province. But then, the equalization formula sees that new income, says, hey, you're richer now, and it cuts their equalization payment. If that clawback is anywhere near 100%, why would you even bother? Why take all the risk if the net benefit is zero? And the thing is, this isn't just a theory. Look at this example from Saskatchewan. In the early 2000s, for every new dollar they earned from energy, they lost $1.25 in federal transfers. They were literally paying to get richer. The system actively penalizes economic development and can actually reward stagnation. It's wild. So the formula doesn't just create these bizarre incentives, it's also packed with inconsistencies that give some provinces a structural advantage. And that brings us to mechanism number 3, the hydro loophole. And this slide just illustrates the problem perfectly. When the formula looks at Alberta, it figures out its ability to raise money based on market rates for oil and gas. It even includes hypothetical money from a provincial sales tax that Alberta doesn't even have. But then it looks at Quebec's massive hydro resources, and it doesn't ask what they could make. It only counts the actual, much lower revenues that its Crown Corporation collects by selling power at deliberately cheap rates. So what's the result of this? Well, Quebec's true ability to raise revenue is systematically underestimated. It's an advantage that's built right into the math. It allows the province to have both artificially cheap electricity and billions of dollars in equalization payments. Some have called it an energy inefficiency trap. Now, these technical flaws, they aren't just accounting issues for economists to argue about. No, they fuel real-world political anger and this growing sense of alienation. They make people feel like the entire game is rigged. You can literally trace a direct line from economic pain to political action. Remember when oil prices crashed in 2014? Alberta's economy was bleeding jobs. But because the formula is on a lag, the province was still seen as rich and got zero help. That led directly to calls for reform from Saskatchewan, to Alberta's Fair Deal panel, and finally to a provincial referendum on the whole issue.
And look, this frustration isn't new, and it's not just a Western Canada thing. 2 decades ago, this was the premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, a province that felt totally penalized by the formula as its offshore oil money started rolling in. At some point or another, premiers from almost every province have called this program unfair. And for many, equalization has just become a symbol for a much bigger set of problems. It's not just about the money anymore. It's gotten all tangled up in fights over pipelines, carbon taxes, and this general feeling that the economic engine of the country is being ignored or maybe even punished by Ottawa. So where does all of this lead? The entire system, this whole $25 billion transfer program, is balanced on a really precarious foundation. And that foundation, it is starting to crack. See, the whole system only works as long as the golden goose, that's Alberta's resource-heavy economy, keeps laying golden eggs in the form of massive federal tax revenues. But that golden goose, it's sick. The economic engine that funds these huge transfers is sputtering. It's being squeezed from all sides. There's a lack of pipelines to get its product to market. You've got federal policies like the carbon tax and an emissions cap, plus the entire global shift away from fossil fuels. All of these things are threatening the profitability of the very industry that keeps the money flowing. And this raises the most critical question of all. If Alberta's economy goes into a structural decline and it stops being the primary have province, who pays? Because there's no one else in line. If that money stops flowing, the provinces that receive it are facing a fiscal cliff. We're talking massive tax hikes or devastating service cuts just to fill the multi-billion-dollar holes in their budgets. We are entering an era of scarcity. And in an era of scarcity, sharing can start to feel a whole lot like theft. The program was designed to be the glue holding the Federation together, but without some serious reform, it's starting to look a lot more like the bill for its divorce. The fundamental terms of the Canadian marriage are being renegotiated, whether we like it or not.